Imagine scientists releasing millions of mosquitoes into the wild, genetically modified ones, created in laboratories. Sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, right? But this is the reality of our world. 10 years ago, this seemed like salvation from deadly diseases. Today, we see consequences they prefer to keep quiet about. Subscribe to the channel to learn the truth about humanity's most controversial experiments. The story of the tiger mosquito began long before the advent of gene technologies. This striped aggressor from the jungles of Southeast Asia spread across the planet thanks to global trade. In containers with goods, in ship holds, in airplane wheels, insects traveled between continents. By the early 2000s, the tiger mosquito had turned into a global threat. Dengue, Zika, chikungunya, yellow fever. Hundreds of thousands infected annually. Tens of thousands of deaths, especially in poor countries where medical care is unavailable to most of the population. Traditional control methods failed. Insecticides killed everything alive, but mosquitoes quickly developed immunity. Draining swamps didn't help because tiger mosquitoes learned to breed in tiny puddles of water the size of a bottle cap. Then, scientists proposed a solution that sounded revolutionary. Instead of chemicals, use nature itself against itself. Release millions of genetically modified males that would mate with wild females and produce non-viable offspring. The British company Oxitec developed mosquitoes with a built-in death gene. Larvae from such males developed normally, but suddenly died at a certain stage. The population was supposed to decline sharply. The plan seemed perfect, but nature rarely follows human plans. The first large-scale trials began in Brazil in 2011. The city of Juazeiro became a testing ground for the experiment. Every week, they released hundreds of thousands of genetically modified mosquitoes. Local residents protested, but nobody listened to their voices. Activists called the project madness, interference with nature with unpredictable consequences. Scientists, however, insisted on absolute safety. They said genetically modified mosquitoes couldn't survive and pass their genes to the wild population. Everything was under control. Or was it? The first results looked encouraging. The mosquito population in Juazeiro decreased by 80% in 6 months. Dengue infection cases declined. Scientists celebrated victory. Media wrote about the triumph of science, but the celebration proved premature. In 2019, a team of researchers from Yale University conducted an independent genetic study of mosquitoes in Juazeiro. The results shocked the scientific community. Genetically modified mosquitoes didn't just survive, they crossbred with wild specimens. Genes from laboratory mosquitoes were found in wild populations. What was supposed to be impossible happened. Hybrids proved viable and continued to reproduce. Nature found a way to bypass the self-destruction mechanism created by humans. Moreover, hybrid mosquitoes demonstrated increased resistance to insecticides. They turned out to be more resilient and aggressive than their wild ancestors. Instead of weakening the population, the experiment might have created super mosquitoes, real-life Frankenstein monsters. Oxitec Company and its supporters fiercely denied the danger. They claimed the methodology of Yale researchers contained errors, published rebuttals, but questions remained. What else are they hiding from the public? What data are they keeping secret? The American Environmental Protection Agency concealed information about the potential toxicity and allergenicity of genetically modified mosquitoes. Documents were classified. Public organizations filed lawsuits demanding transparency. They were ignored. Meanwhile, programs started in other countries: Cayman Islands, Panama, Malaysia, Florida. Everywhere they promised quick results and absolute safety. But reality again proved more complex than beautiful promises. In the Cayman Islands, the program was shut down after 2 years. The Minister of Health publicly stated they didn't get the expected results. The mosquito population didn't decrease enough. Money spent in vain. The experiment was declared a failure. In Florida, residents staged mass protests against the release of genetically modified mosquitoes. They collected petitions, demanded referendums, blocked roads. People didn't want to become guinea pigs in an experiment with unpredictable consequences. But authorities insisted on their way. Millions of mosquitoes were released despite protests. Officials cited regulatory approval. But who controlled the regulators themselves? Weren't they financially connected to biotechnology companies? In Australia, they used a different approach. Instead of genetic modifications, mosquitoes were infected with Wolbachia bacteria. This bacterium made males reproductively incompatible with uninfected females. The method seemed safer than genetic engineering. The Australian program showed good results in the first years. Dengue cases declined sharply. The bacterium spread naturally through the population, but long-term effects remained unknown. What will happen in 20 or 30 years? Scientists honestly admitted they couldn't predict all consequences. Ecosystems are too complex. Interactions between species are unpredictable. Interference with one link in the chain can trigger a cascade of unforeseen changes. By the mid-20s, it became obvious that program effectiveness was declining. In some regions of Brazil, the mosquito population began recovering. Wild females learned to distinguish genetically modified males and avoid mating with them. Evolution worked against humans. Mosquitoes adapted faster than scientists could develop new methods. Nature showed who was in charge here. Billions of years of evolution against several decades of genetic engineering. But the most dramatic turn occurred in Africa. In August 2025, the government of Burkina Faso suddenly closed the Target Malaria Project. This was one of the most ambitious programs using genetically modified mosquitoes. Authorities sealed the laboratories, destroyed all mosquitoes, sprayed insecticides, called the project a threat to national sovereignty. Scientists from around the world were shocked. The project was supported by Bill Gates himself. What actually happened? The official version spoke of pressure from activists and anti-Western sentiment. Unofficial sources mentioned a disinformation campaign coordinated from outside. Conspiracy theorists whispered about secret data that authorities didn't want to disclose. The project in Burkina Faso was supposed to be a breakthrough. Scientists planned to use gene drive technology. This is a more advanced method where modified genes are passed to almost all offspring, not half. The population was supposed to disappear in a few generations. But gene drive technology frightened even many scientists. This was irreversible interference with evolution. Once released into nature, such genes could spread uncontrollably. Stopping the process would be impossible. Critics called gene drive a biological weapon, a technology that in the wrong hands could destroy entire species or create organisms with unpredictable properties. What if terrorists or hostile states gain access? The closure of the project in Burkina Faso showed the fragility of the entire genetically modified mosquito program. Billions of dollars in investments, decades of research. Everything could collapse due to political decisions or public pressure. Meanwhile, the tiger mosquito continued its triumphant march across the planet. In 2025, it was first discovered in Dagestan. Russia was no longer protected from the tropical threat. Climate change expanded the range of insects. In Europe, the tiger mosquito spread across Germany, France, Italy, Switzerland. Scientists predicted that dengue and chikungunya would soon become endemic to the European continent. Programs with genetically modified mosquitoes clearly weren't coping. More than 150 people died from chikungunya in 2025 alone. Almost 500,000 were infected worldwide. Numbers grew despite billions of mosquitoes released to fight diseases. A logical question arose: do these programs work at all? Or is this a gigantic scam by biotechnology companies draining money from governments under the pretext of fighting epidemics? Oxitec and other companies earned billions selling genetically modified mosquitoes. Contracts with governments were classified. Nobody knew exact amounts. Nobody could independently verify the real effectiveness of programs. Some researchers pointed out that success data was provided by the companies themselves. Independent long-term studies were practically not conducted. The few that existed, like the Yale study, showed alarming results. Articles began appearing in scientific journals questioning the entire approach. Scientists wrote about the need for more thorough risk assessment, about the unpredictability of ecological consequences, about the potential threat of creating control-resistant populations. But skeptics' voices drowned in the chorus of optimistic statements. Companies continued advertising their technologies. Governments continued signing contracts. Money flowed like a river. The machine was launched, and stopping it was difficult. Public organizations demanded a moratorium on releasing genetically modified mosquitoes until full assessment of long-term consequences. They collected signatures, organized protests, filed lawsuits. They were called Luddites and enemies of progress. But were they wrong? The history of science is full of examples when technologies that seemed safe led to catastrophes. DDT was considered a miracle remedy until it turned out it destroyed entire ecosystems. Asbestos was used for decades before being recognized as carcinogenic. Plastic seemed like an ideal material. Now microplastic has been found in the blood of every person on the planet. Aren't we repeating the same mistakes with genetically modified organisms? Technology supporters objected that there was no alternative. Malaria kills 600,000 people a year. Dengue cripples millions. Something must be done. We can't just sit idly by and watch people die from diseases. This was a strong argument. Indeed, how can we refuse a technology that can save lives? How do we explain to a mother who lost a child to malaria that we're not using available methods because of hypothetical risks? But critics pointed out that safer approaches exist. Improving sanitary conditions, developing the healthcare system, vaccines against malaria and dengue, educational programs. All this works without unpredictable consequences. The problem was that these methods required long-term infrastructure investments. Genetically modified mosquitoes seemed like a quick solution, a magic wand that would solve the problem in one stroke. But magic doesn't exist in the real world. By the end of the 20s, it became clear that genetically modified mosquito programs didn't meet expectations. Somewhere they showed temporary results, somewhere they failed completely. Everywhere unforeseen problems arose. Hybridization in Brazil, failure in the Cayman Islands, project closure in Burkina Faso, mosquito adaptation, continued spread of the tiger mosquito worldwide. All this painted a picture far from the promised triumph of science. Economic costs were colossal. Billions of dollars spent on development, production, mosquito release. Meanwhile, disease cases continued to grow on a global scale. The money could have been used more effectively. But the most alarming thing wasn't the ineffectiveness of programs. The scariest thing was that we didn't know the long-term consequences. 10 years is too short a period for ecological changes. Real effects might manifest in generations. What if hybrid mosquitoes turn out to be carriers of new diseases? What if modified genes transfer to other insect species? What if we launched processes we can't control? Scientists tried to create safety systems, self-limitation mechanisms, genes that should disappear from the population after several generations, but nature already showed it knows how to bypass our clever plans. Evolution works through trial and error for billions of years. It finds solutions we can't even think of. Our science, for all its power, is still like a child playing with fire in a powder magazine. Some researchers warned about the possibility of creating a precedent. If we learn to manipulate animal populations so easily, who guarantees responsible use of this power? Who controls the controllers? International organizations tried to develop regulatory standards, but they had no real power. Each country made its own decisions. Biotechnology companies lobbied their interests. Money spoke louder than caution. Bioethics committees appeared, expert groups, World Health Organization recommendations. All this created an illusion of control. But the reality was that nobody truly understood what was happening. Nature is too complex, ecosystems are too entangled, interactions between species are too numerous. We tried to control a system we barely understood. This was arrogance that could cost us dearly. And yet programs continued. Companies developed new generations of genetically modified mosquitoes. Governments signed new contracts. Scientists published optimistic forecasts. The machine worked at full capacity. Critics grew tired of warning. Activists grew tired of protesting. The public grew tired of being afraid. People got used to the new reality where genetically modified organisms became part of everyday life. The normalization of absurdity was complete. Educational programs in schools told children about genetically modified mosquitoes as an achievement of science. A new generation grew up considering this normal. Questions about safety seemed old-fashioned and inappropriate. Meanwhile, the biotechnology industry expanded. From mosquitoes, they moved to other insects, to agricultural pests, to forest parasites. Technology found more and more applications. Boundaries blurred. Scientists worked on genetically modified flies, beetles, butterflies. Each species required a separate approach. Each carried its own risks. But the process was launched and stopping it was already impossible. Some companies began developing genetically modified animals to control rodent populations. Rats and mice carrying diseases were the next target. Technology was scaling up. The apocalypse approached with imperceptible steps. Science fiction writers long warned about a world where humans play God with genetics. Now, this world was becoming reality. But unlike books and movies, there was no dramatic climax here. Everything happened gradually and mundanely. The story of releasing millions of genetically modified mosquitoes showed the main thing. Humanity is ready to risk the future to solve immediate problems. We play with forces we don't understand, hoping everything will work out. 10 years after large-scale programs began, the world changed, but not as promised. Mosquitoes didn't disappear. Diseases weren't defeated, but hybrids with unpredictable properties appeared. Pandora's box of genetic engineering was opened. What will happen in the next 10 years? Nobody knows. Scientists build models, but nature laughs at models. We launched processes that will develop according to their own laws, beyond our control. Perhaps we'll see new diseases carried by hybrid mosquitoes. Perhaps the technology will finally work and populations will decrease. Perhaps something will happen that we don't even suspect now. One thing can be said for certain: we live in an era of a grandiose experiment on nature and ourselves. We are all participants in this experiment, whether we want it or not, and we'll learn the results only when it's too late to change anything. So what happened 10 years after releasing millions of tiger mosquitoes? Hybridization instead of disappearance, program failures in the Cayman Islands, project closure in Africa, continued mosquito spread worldwide, unpredictable consequences we're only beginning to understand. Subscribe to the channel to follow the development of this story and learn the truth they're hiding. Write in the comments: do you trust scientists releasing genetically modified organisms into nature, or do you consider this a dangerous experiment on humanity? Your opinion can change the future.